7 years ago, Jen Cowley wrote a book to help children navigate their way through grief and loss. Now in its third print run, Grandpa's Hat has helped many people, not just kids, but their parents and carers through some really tough times. Author Jen Cowley joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, everyone.
What prompted this book?
It comes from a very, very personal space, and I'll try to make it a shorter version. But when I was a child, I lost my dad when I was 12, and I wasn't allowed to see him for the last 3 weeks of his life, and this was back in the late 70s, and
thinking was different.
Thinking was different, yeah, and the idea was that you insulated children from harm, and with the very best of intentions, my brothers and I were very much held at arm's length from that whole process, and you know, at the funeral we were given sedatives to make sure there were no public displays of affection and of emotion, and we wore sunglasses so that the tears wouldn't show. And I remember there was an old Italian lady who had been a friend of the family, and she did the full Italian wailing bit. And I remember thinking, as a 12-year-old,
it can be shocking when you haven't seen it before.
Yeah, but I remember thinking as a 12-year-old, that's what I want to do.
But that's how I feel.
That's how I feel, and why can't I do that? You know, and but it was the whole stiff upper lip thing that we still tend to do. We still tend to try to shield children, again, with the very best of intentions. And my brothers were away at school, and the headmaster went down and got them out of class and said, "Boys, your father died last night. We've got a train booked to Binaway for you, so somebody will take you to the train tomorrow. Okay, back to class." You know, and that's just the way it was dealt with. And so the ripple effects of that have lasted a long time. And then shortly after that, a few years after that, my little brother was killed in a farm accident. And again, the whole stiff upper lip thing, and we didn't talk about it. There was no counselling in those days. That was the early 80s. And so in many years later, in 2009, my older brother, to whom I was very, very, very close, dropped dead of a heart attack, and the world shifted on its axis, and I couldn't find my way out of that fog. I couldn't. I just couldn't function. And
you almost had opportunities to learn about grief at such a young age,
and so,
you hadn't taken the lessons.
That's right, and as a result, when I couldn't function through my grief of the loss of Ross, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought, gosh, you know, I'm going mad, and I knew of NALAG, you know, peripherally what they did, and I sort of fell through the door of NALAG because I knew I needed some help.
Because everybody at some stage deals with grief.
Absolutely. It's the club nobody wants to belong to, but we're all going to at some point. And NALAG, being the National Association for Loss and Grief, fortunately we have our headquarters here in Dubbo.
Yeah.
And so they helped me to understand that the grief that I was feeling now was exacerbated by the grief that was unprocessed from my childhood. And that's a very succinct way of putting it. But so through the process of speaking with them and learning with them, I understood why what I was feeling was quite normal. And it also helped me to realise just how important it is that children be included in discussions, age appropriately, of course, about death and dying, and to take them along on the journey. Children are very concrete little thinkers, and we tend to want to shield them from that hurt. But in fact, what we do by shielding them is we distance them from the process and from the opportunity to work their way through it and to understand. So with NALAG's help, they suggested that because I was a writer, that I might write something as a tribute to my brother. You know, people plant trees or have a tattoo or whatever.
You wrote a book.
And I wrote a little book, and it did its job, and then it went into the drawer, and I didn't really think about it again until my husband's younger sister developed a rare and brutal cancer, and she died leaving a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old daughters, and so we were pretty determined that they wouldn't have the same experience that I'd had. So we thought that the universe was sort of telling us something, and so I went to NALAG and said, "Would you mind if I published this as a resource for you?" And they were thrilled with the idea, and they helped me to put together a section for the back of it to help guide parents and carers. So it's a true resource in the true sense of the word. But the Rotary Clubs of Dubbo and Coonabarabran, where I'm come from, helped to fund the project, and so with that assistance and with the wonderful input of my very clever friend Mark Horton, who's an artist. He did the illustrations, we published it, and I'm very proud to say that now it's in its 3rd print run, as you said. Yeah, it's remarkable.
Tell me about Mark Horton's vision for the book, because he is a friend of yours and his illustrations are just beautiful.
Well, without the illustrations from Mark, the book doesn't have the same impact that it's not great for radio, but if you could see these illustrations, they're gorgeous. They're watercolours, and they're based on my own experience as a child and photographs from my childhood. And he did them in watercolour, and it took ages for him to get in his head what it was that I wanted. You know, so it was definitely a labour of love. But the series of images, when we launched the book, we raised $25,000 through the sale of the original paintings, and that helped to NALAG to fund a child psychologist for 12 months, which was great. But the illustrations are absolutely superb. Yeah, and I think they strike a chord matched with the words with regional kids. You know, it's and with regional adults as well.
How did that change your friendship with Mark, going through that process of, I guess, sharing something like it's something quite personal, and your personal vision and his creativity to try and meld them? Did that change things for you guys?
I think he was enormously frustrated with me to begin with, because he had never worked in watercolour before. Yeah. And I was determined that it be in watercolour because I thought that suited the genre. So every time, I think he got very frustrated because he'd present me with a style and I'd go, no,
it's not quite right.
It's not quite right.
It's good, but it's not
quite right. And but he was wonderful, and he's terribly patient, and we had been very good friends for a long time. So he knew how important and how personal a journey it was for me. And so he was very patient, and yes, the result is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm slightly biased, I guess.
3 print runs. Did you think it would go that far?
Not in a million years. When I first wrote it, it was just a therapeutic thing for me, and it did the job, and I put it in the drawer, so to speak. So to now know that it has helped literally thousands of not only children but adults as well, because it's
who don't know how to deal with it.
Don't know how to deal with it, and to kickstart that conversation is really difficult, because often when you have to have that conversation, you yourself are in the depths of grief, and it's a really tough time. So to have this as a starting point, but it's really interesting, Rob, because As I often go out and speak to groups and various people about the book and about my experience, and I also should, as a caveat, reveal that I am a board member of NALAG now. But and all the proceeds from the book in their entirety still go back to NALAG. But very often I have to leave 2 hours afterwards, after the presentation, because people want to share their stories, because this is such a shared experience, you know, particularly for those of us who grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when we really did subcontract all our grief out, and you just didn't talk about it to the extent that we do even now. Or
in hushed tones.
Hushed tones, or in euphemisms. You know, we talk about passing away, and which, you know, we really should say die, because children passed away, you know, where has Grandpa passed away to? You know, so we really need to get back to using direct and straight language with children, and explaining in age-appropriate ways how the process works, because it's going to happen. So very often I find myself as a sort of de facto counsellor, an accidental counsellor with adults who went through a very similar experience to me. And Grandpa's hat often, and I always take a counsellor with me now because I'm not a trained counsellor, but it very often is a trigger in a good way, and people you know, these days it's okay to acknowledge that grief is you know, can be life-changing.
Absolutely. It certainly seems like it's changed your life. I can't let you go without giving a bit more of a plug for NALAG and what it does. Why is that organisation so important to you?
NALAG is not only important to me because it changed and saved, and I don't exaggerate when I say it saved my life, if not directly, then certainly emotionally. NALAG helps people to navigate through all kinds of loss, and remembering that loss is not just about bereavement, it's also about the loss of circumstance, the loss of health, the loss of relationships, the loss of country, the loss of culture, language. So there are all kinds of loss, and from all those different losses, anything that changes your world and changes your reality can lead to grief. And grief can be lifelong and either destructive or constructive. So NALAG helps in very many ways. The services are provided free of charge to clients who, and NALAG now has branches in the Hunter and in Mudgee, and there's a Sydney branch now, and there's a telephone counselling service. NALAG does training and works with whole communities as well as individuals and with children, and there's some wonderful, wonderful people are involved. We have a terrific volunteer base, without which we couldn't operate. We have an incredible clinical team that works in the counselling and grief support space. And it's the sort of organisation that flies under the radar a little bit in terms of being. It's a very private thing what we do. So whilst we like to promote what we do, it's a very private thing. So as I said, flies under the radar with funding a lot too, which can be a bit tricky. But in that space, it's a wonderful organisation, and it differs because it is so practical and really fits with the regional mindset too. I think it's a wonderful organisation, and I'm very proud to be involved.
All right, Jennifer Cowley, thank you for joining me to talk about 7 years of Grandpa's Hat.
7 years of Grandpa's Hat, which is available through NALAG. And if I can just give the plug to nalag.org.au is where you can order the book.